The train screeched to a halt in the middle of nowhere, its iron wheels grinding against the tracks with a sound that cut through the cold evening air like a warning. Dust rose in swirls around the wooden station platform, which looked more like a forgotten shed than a place of welcome. The passengers hurried off, farmers, merchants, wives carrying baskets of bread and cloth. But no one was waiting for her. She stepped down slowly, clutching her single carpet bag, her once fine dress worn thin, her stomach hollow from 2 days of barely eating. Her name was Clara, and she was supposed to meet her husband, her future husband, the man who had written her letters, promising a home, a future, and a chance to start over in this harsh, untamed land. But the platform was empty. The faces of strangers passed her by, none of them looking for her, none of them calling her name. She stood there until the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in tired strokes of gold and red, until the last passenger was gone, until the train whistled again and pulled away, leaving behind nothing but silence. Clara was alone. She had been promised marriage, shelter, and dignity. Yet all she had now was a letter that suddenly felt like a lie and the terrible ache of hunger gnawing at her ribs. She sank onto the wooden bench, her carpetbag at her feet, her throat tight with fear. And then, from the shadows of the station, a tiny voice whispered, trembling but clear, "Can you read me a story?" 2. Before I continue, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of stories to change lives, please take a moment to like this video, comment your thoughts, share it with others, and subscribe to Stories Collection. Your support helps bring more heart-touching stories like this to life. 2. Clara blinked, startled. A little girl stood there, her dress ragged and her hair tangled, holding a tattered book against her chest like it was the most precious treasure in the world. Her face was thin, cheeks pale, but her eyes, wide, searching, almost pleading, shone with a light Clara hadn't seen in years. The girl's small hand tightened around the book, as though she feared Clara would turn her away. Clara opened her mouth, but no words came at first. She was starving, abandoned, lost in a place that was not her home. Yet something inside her, something softer than fear, something deeper than hunger, stirred at the sight of that child. She reached out a trembling hand and nodded. The girl hurried closer, climbed onto the bench beside her, and set the book in Clara's lap. It was nothing more than a broken copy of fairy tales, pages missing, the cover stained. But Clara traced her fingers over it like it was gold. She began to read. Her voice was weak at first, raspy from thirst. But as the story unfolded, something remarkable happened. The girl leaned against her side, listening with a stillness that felt holy, and Clara forgot, for a moment, her own despair. The words carried them both somewhere far away from that station, away from loneliness and hunger, into a world where courage and hope always triumphed. By the time Clara closed the book, the little girl had tears in her eyes. That was the beginning. Clara soon learned that the girl's name was Annie, and that she had been waiting too, not for someone to marry, but for someone to care. Her mother had died the winter before, and her father, broken by grief, had taken to drink and wandering, leaving Annie to fend for herself. She had survived by begging for scraps at the station, clutching that one storybook as her only friend. And now, as fate would have it, the abandoned bride and the abandoned child had found each other in the silence of that station. The days that followed were a test of endurance. Clara had no money for food, no roof, no one to turn to. She and Annie shared what little they could find. Half a loaf of bread offered by a kind stranger, a bowl of thin soup from the tavern, when the cook felt generous. Clara, who had once been too proud, too afraid to even imagine such hardship, now tore her last piece of cloth to patch Annie's dress, or gave her portion of food, so the child would not go to sleep hungry. It was suffering, yes, but it was shared. And in that sharing, Clara felt less alone. She decided she could not wait forever for a husband who might never come. With Annie by her side, she walked into town and asked for work. Doors closed in her face again and again. No one wanted a penniless woman with a child that wasn't her own. But Clara persisted, her pride swallowed, her heart fueled by the need to protect the girl who clung to her hand like it was her lifeline. Finally, an elderly widow who ran a small boarding house agreed to let them sweep floors, wash laundry, and help in the kitchen in exchange for food and a bed in the attic. It was humble, but to Clara and Annie, it was salvation. At night, after long days of toil, Clara would open the little fairy tale book and read by candlelight. Annie would curl beside her, her eyes heavy but her spirit lighter, whispering, "One more, please, just one more." And Clara would read until her voice broke, until the candle burned low, until the world outside seemed less cruel. But life was not done testing them. One evening, a storm tore across the town, flooding the streets, toppling fences, and tearing roofs. The boarding house shook with every gust, and Clara rushed to protect Annie, wrapping her arms around her like a shield. When the storm passed, much of the town lay in ruin. Families wept over their losses, homes were destroyed, and people were left with nothing. Clara knew the pain of abandonment, the taste of hunger, and she refused to let Annie, or anyone else, go through it alone. She began to help however she could, mending clothes, sharing bread, reading stories aloud to children huddled in the wreckage. It was then that people began to notice her, not as the woman left behind at the station, not as a beggar with a child that wasn't hers, but as a beacon of strength, of quiet grace. The widow of the boarding house said she had never seen such determination in a woman, and soon others began offering Clara work, sewing, teaching letters to children, even reading aloud at the church gatherings. Her voice, once weak with hunger, became a thread that stitched broken hearts back together. And then, one evening, as Clara finished reading to a group of children, she looked up and saw a man standing at the back. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face weathered by years of labor. He looked at her not with pity, but with something deeper, something searching. Later she learned he had been the brother of the man who was meant to marry her, the one who had abandoned her. He confessed that his brother had run off to California chasing gold and left Clara's letters unopened. Yet he had watched her quietly from afar these past weeks, amazed at the woman she had become despite everything. Slowly, gently, he began to court her, not with promises on paper, but with kindness, with deeds, with respect for the bond she already had with Annie. Clara, who had once been left starving at a station, forgotten by the very man she thought would save her, now found something far more precious. A new family, born not of contracts and desperation, but of love, resilience, and the healing power of stories shared in the dark. If this story touched your heart, if you believe no one should ever be left behind, and that kindness can rewrite even the saddest chapters of our lives, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Stories Collection. Your engagement helps these stories continue to reach souls who need them. Special request to comment. Tell us in the comments below. Have you ever had a stranger's kindness change your life? Even in a small way, your story may inspire someone else today. The train moaned like a wounded beast as it ground to a stop, the wheels shrieking against the steel tracks. Clara clutched her carpetbag tightly to her chest, her knuckles white, her heart pounding in her ears. She stepped onto the cracked wooden platform, expecting, hoping, to see a tall figure waiting, perhaps with flowers, or at least with the promise of belonging. But the platform was nearly empty. Strangers hurried past, faces turned away. Carts rattled off down the road, and no one looked for her. The wind tugged at her worn dress, and a sharp pang of hunger twisted her stomach. She had traveled for days on little food, spending the last of her coins just to get here. The man who was supposed to meet her, the man who had written promises of marriage, of home, of safety, was nowhere to be seen. Minutes stretched into hours, and still no one came. By the time the train whistled again and pulled away, leaving behind silence and the echo of her own breathing, Clara realized the truth: she had been abandoned. She sank onto a splintered bench, her throat thick with despair, and for the first time in years, tears burned her eyes. Then, from the shadows, came a whisper, a voice so soft, so trembling, that at first she thought it was her own imagination. "Can you read me a story?" Clara blinked. Before her stood a girl no more than 7, barefoot, her hair tangled, her small arms wrapped protectively around a battered book. The child's cheeks were hollow, her dress torn, but her eyes, oh, her eyes, shone with a plea so raw it broke something inside Clara. The girl edged closer, holding out the book as though it were treasure, her voice shaking. "Please, before I go on, dear listener, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the power of stories to bring hope, please take a moment to like this video, share it with others, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to Stories Collection. Your support helps bring more heart-touching stories like this one to life." Clara stared at the girl, torn between her own gnawing hunger and the child's desperate request. Her hands trembled as she reached for the book. It was a ragged old copy of fairy tales, half the pages loose, the cover faded. Yet as Clara began to read, her voice low and unsteady, the girl's face softened. She leaned against Clara's side, as if they had always belonged together. And as the words spilled into the empty station, Clara felt her own despair ease, if only for a moment. The girl's name was Annie. She told Clara, in broken pieces, that her mother had died and her father had drifted into the bottle, leaving her to fend for herself at the station. She survived on scraps, but what she longed for more than bread was stories. Clara listened, her heart breaking, and made a decision that would change both their lives. She could not leave this child behind. The following days tested them beyond measure. Clara, still abandoned, searched for work in town. Door after door closed in her face. She had no husband, no family, no standing. And Annie was just a ragged orphan no one wanted to claim. They slept cold and hungry more nights than Clara could bear to admit. But she always saved the last crumb for Annie, always wrapped her thin shawl tighter around the girl before herself. At last, a widow running a boarding house took pity on them. In exchange for scrubbing floors and washing laundry, Clara and Annie were given a tiny cot in the attic and 2 bowls of stew each day. To Clara, it was salvation. To Annie, it was the closest thing to home she had known in years. And each night, Clara lit a stub of candle and read aloud from the tattered storybook until Annie drifted to sleep with a smile on her face. The woman who had been left starving at a station with nothing but her pride now found purpose in the unlikeliest place, in caring for a little girl who had been forgotten by the world. Clara's hands grew rough from labor, her body weary from endless chores, but her heart grew stronger. She was no longer just waiting for a husband who never came. She was building a new life, page by page, story by story, with Annie at her side. If this story touched your heart, if you believe no one should ever be left behind, and that kindness can rewrite even the saddest chapters, please like this video, share it, and subscribe to Stories Collection. Your engagement helps us keep sharing stories that move souls. Special request to comment. Tell us in the comments, what's one story or act of kindness from your past that you'll never forget? Your words might inspire someone who needs hope today.